Hello. You're on Wisdom of the Chosen One channel. Chosen One, your isolation isn't a curse, it's a selection process. In the quiet moments when you find yourself standing alone, a heavy silence can feel like a weight, a curse that refuses to lift. Your thoughts grow louder, echoing doubts that you are not meant for the path you see ahead. You may feel like a lone wolf, a fragile thread pulled out from the tapestry of ordinary life, and wonder why the world seems to have turned its back on you. This message is not for everyone, but only for the chosen ones. If you are one of them, then this is for you. If not, then you won't understand what we're going to talk about next. But imagine if that isolation were not a punishment, but a deliberate filter, a crucible designed to separate the essential from the extraneous. The very solitude that feels isolating can be the precise process by which your true purpose is honed. In this space, you confront the noise that once clouded your vision, and you sharpen the focus that will carry you through the trials to come. This isn't a universal truth. It speaks most loudly to those who already feel that quiet, questioning voice inside, asking whether they're truly chosen or simply abandoned. What you will take away is a new lens on that solitude, a recognition that the isolation you experience is a selection process, not a curse. You will learn to trust that this quiet is not a void but a forge where your strength is tested, your intentions clarified, and your readiness for what lies ahead confirmed. In the next moments, we'll explore how to harness this isolation to become the most authentic version of yourself, ready to step forward when the world finally calls. Chosen One, before watching, write the number 777 in the comments. This will let other chosen ones know that you exist and that you are not alone. There is a moment, unseen to most, when the clamor of 1,000 voices dims to a single breath. You may be tempted to think you are simply a quiet corner in a storm, but it is the quiet that carries a weight far greater than the noise. When the world shouts at you career ambitions, social obligations, the endless scroll of comparison, listen instead for the faint, persistent murmur that no one else hears. That murmur is no mere wish. It is an invitation to a different rhythm, one that requires stillness to discern. In the hush, you may sense a gentle tug, a subtle shift in the way your thoughts line up with a purpose that feels older than the present moment. It is not a luxury of solitude, but a furnace of selection. The same furnace that shapes gold also sears the unready. To honor that call, practice selective listening, set aside time where no one else can hear you, early dawn, late night, a quiet walk. Let the conversation be with yourself, not with the world. When you do, you will see that the voices of envy, distraction, and self-doubt are merely echoes, trying to drown out the tender voice of the divine. Remember, the true path is not a path of isolation for its own sake, but a path of refinement. The quiet call does not demand you abandon all relationships. It demands you choose those that echo its resonance. In that choice, you find the strength to be more than a passive participant, and the courage to become the one who was set apart. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing the storm is not a threat, but a shaping hand. In the solitude that follows the tempest, you feel the edges of your spirit smoothing, each wave of grief or doubt a deliberate chisel. You are not a broken vessel. You are a container being carved from the same stone that birthed the storm. When the world's noise drags you into its whirl, step back. The silence you seek is not emptiness, but a laboratory where faith is tested. It is in those moments of stillness, the absence of applause, that the heart learns to listen to the deeper currents. Guard your inner life as a captain guards his compass. Let the noise of distraction be a false star that you cross out, and let your focus be the true north, God's whispered promise that you will be made whole. Remember that a ship's strength is measured not by its size, but by how it withstands the fiercest gale. The same applies to your spirit. Each trial that presses against you is a pressure test, a furnace that removes the iron that could not withstand. When you feel the sting of isolation, know that it is a deliberate pause in a larger symphony. The louder, shakier chords behind it will eventually harmonize with the quiet, and you will emerge as a vessel not of your own design but of divine intention. Keep your eyes on the horizon, for the storm will not last forever, and the calm that follows is a testament to the selection process that has chosen you for a purpose far greater than the noise of the moment. There is a quiet place in the world that no one else can see, a hush that sits like a stone between heartbeats. When you feel the weight of it pressing upon you, do not mistake it for a void. It is a crucible, a space, where the fire of your purpose is held and tempered. In that stillness, the voice of the world quiets enough for you to hear the whisper of the divine. It is not the absence of sound that counts, but the presence of something deeper, a stillness that bears a heaviness because it is a place of deliberate choice. You have stepped into it, knowing the silence will weigh on your shoulders, for it is the burden that separates the ordinary from the chosen. Do not surrender to languor. When the mind begins to wander, pull the focus back like a rope pulling a ship's anchor. Each moment you resist distraction, each breath you hold in quiet, you are sharpening a blade. The weight of stillness, therefore, is not a curse, but a selection process that weeds out the noise of your own frailties. Remember that the same stillness that seems oppressive is the very ground upon which your future is built. Sit with it. Let it press into your bones and feel the subtle shift. Your spirit is being drawn toward the shape it has been destined to become. In that weight, find your purpose, for the silence is the forge in which the chosen one is made. You stand in the quiet where the light of your purpose is still a flicker. In that space, the world's noise can either drown it out or sharpen its glow. Guarding that light is not a defensive act, it is a deliberate choice in the selection process. First, be the steward of your thoughts. Every fleeting image, every idle comparison is a potential eclipse. When a thought arises that shadows your inner flame, pause. Ask, does it serve the light or dim it? Replace the shadow with a word of truth, a prayer, or a memory of a moment when you felt the divine touch. Second, draw boundaries as a parent draws a fence around a garden. Your time, your conversations, even your meals are invitations for attention to wander. Set a schedule for silence, an hour each day when you turn away from screens and sit with your heart. In that stillness, the light within can be seen, not as a solitary glow, but as a reflection of the greater source. Third, cultivate the habit of checking in. Like a gardener checks a sapling for pests, examine your emotions for jealousy, distraction, or subtle resistance. When you find a weed, uproot it with a gentle, loving correction, not with condemnation. Remember, the light you hold is not merely yours, it is a spark entrusted by a higher hand. To keep it burning bright, you must guard it with wisdom, patience, and a discipline that mirrors the very selection process that set you apart. In the dimming darkness of isolation, let your guarded light be a beacon, resilient, purposeful, and undeniably yours. When the noise of the world climbs to a roar, the quiet part of you rises like a lighthouse against a storm. In those moments you discover that the silence you feel is not a void, but a compass tuned to a frequency only your heart can hear. It is here in that stillness that the subtle hand of the one who chose you draws the map of your purpose. You have been set apart, not to wander alone, but to listen. The silence of the soul's compass demands discipline, an intentional pause each day to set your attention aside from the chatter of distraction. It is a practice of guarding your inner life, of turning your spirit toward the quiet place where the divine word whispers. When you sit in that hush, you hear the gentle tug of a direction that no friendship, no job, or no fear can override. This is not a luxury, it is a requirement. As you test the boundaries of your environment, notice the moment your heart feels a tug toward a new path. Do not dismiss it as a fleeting thought. It may be the call of your selection process. By cultivating this silence, you learn to discern subtle opposition, jealousy, doubt, the silent siren of comfort, and to keep your focus where the compass points, in the solitude that sharpens you. Let the silence be your mentor. Speak to it, listen to it, and trust that the quiet will guide you to the place where your calling is not a burden, but a deliberate choice. There is a quiet ache that grows when the world you once trusted feels like a dim, familiar corridor. Walls that whisper the same old doubts, echoes that repeat yesterday's failures. You stand at its threshold, and the silence that follows is not emptiness, but a call to step beyond. Outgrowing these familiar shadows is not a rejection of the past, but a sharpening of the light that God has set upon you. When you linger in a place that no longer reflects your growing purpose, the shadow lengthens, consuming the bright corners of your spirit. The first truth is simple: you cannot harvest new fruit while still rooted in the soil that has produced only thorns. Notice the moments when conversation feels hollow, when your heart feels heavy in a crowd that refuses to listen. These are the signs that the environment you hold dear has become a prison of comfort. The second truth is that isolation, when chosen deliberately, is a furnace. It presses you to confront the habits that once served, but now bind. When you leave a circle that has ceased to challenge you, you open the space for new voices, voices that speak of courage, faith, and purpose. Do not fear the solitude that follows. In it, you find the mirror where God's hand reshapes you. Speak aloud your doubts to the quiet. Let them be the seeds that will sprout in the soil of your new surroundings. Seek companions who walk in the same light you are beginning to see, who will lift you when your steps falter. Remember, the path out of shadows is not a hurried sprint, but a measured walk. Each step forward is a declaration that you are no longer a child of the past, but a chosen one, shaped by a divine selection process that demands growth, not complacency. In the hush that follows a day's noise, a voice lingers, not a shout from the crowd, but a quiet sigh that seems to come from the very marrow of your being. It is this whisper you are meant to hear, not because you are superior, but because you have been set apart to listen. In those moments of solitude, the world's clamor fades and the pulse of purpose becomes audible. When the whisper first appears, it can feel like a tremor beneath your ribs, a subtle nudge that refuses to be ignored. It is the echo of a heart that has long been yearning for a place where it can do more than merely survive. You must learn to distinguish it from the noise of doubt and the temptation of comfort. The whisper is not a grand proclamation. It is a steady, patient pulse, inviting you to slow down, to breathe, to align your actions with its rhythm. To heed this quiet call, start with small acts of attention. Turn off the distractions that crowd your mind. Sit in stillness, even for a few minutes each day, and let the light of that whisper grow. When you feel the pull, ask yourself, who am I becoming that this voice knows? The answer will surface through the pattern of your deeds, the way you serve, the compassion you extend. Remember, isolation is not a curse, it is a crucible. In its heat, the true purpose of your life is refined, and the whisper becomes a roar that will guide you to the place where you are meant to be. You have felt the quiet thrum beneath the surface of your days, the faint vibration that can only be heard by those who have chosen to listen. It is not a siren of fear, but a warning that the greatest adversaries do not stand in the crowded streets, but in the very chambers of your heart. These unseen opponents come in quiet whispers, the envy of a friend who knows only the bright light of your calling, the distraction that turns your focus from the task at hand to the next shiny object, the subtle resistance that whispers, "You are alone, you are not needed." Each is a thief of your attention, a blade that seeks to dull the fire that has been kindled within you. When you find yourself weary of the solitude, remember that isolation is not a penance but a forge. In that stillness, those silent adversaries try to pry open the cage of your purpose. They test you by the way you respond when the world is hushed. Do you retreat or do you stand? a candle against the wind? Do you let the subtle jealousy of others erode your confidence? Or do you reinforce your identity in the quiet of God's Word? The test is not measured in grand declarations, but in the simple act of staying present. Each moment you choose to keep your focus, to let the subtle opposition slip by, you deepen the steel of your resolve. In this quiet battle, you learn that strength is not about loud victories, but about the steady, unshaken faith that the path chosen for you will not be abandoned by anyone else. So, when the unseen opponents rise, stand firm. Let your isolation become the arena where your true self is forged, and carry the quiet confidence that you are not merely a participant in a curse, but a steward of a divine selection process. There come times when the world offers no answers, when the questions you ask seem to echo into silence. In that silence, the discipline of unanswered questions is born. You are not a passive receiver of certainty. You are a pilgrim who must learn to walk in the dark. Each unanswered query is a hammer strike on your spirit, shaping your resolve. Do not be tempted to flee the discomfort. The silence is not a void, but a forge. It tests the purity of your purpose, the depth of your faith. In the stillness, you discover that the only voice you need is the one that whispers through the noise. Practical step: record the questions that gnaw at you. Sit with them for a set hour each day, allowing the answer to evaporate from your mind. If it does not appear, trust that the Lord is still working. When the world offers a quick fix, resist. The unanswered are the soil in which your inner life takes root. Guard this soil. Do not let pride or impatience plow it with haste. Remember, a chosen soul does not seek answers to prove worth. They seek answers to refine self. Each unanswered question is a milestone, a silent instruction that the path ahead is narrower, purer. When the question remains unanswered, let it be a signpost, not a stumbling block. Your isolation does not isolate you from revelation. It places you in the quiet room where the divine drafts your destiny. In this discipline, you learn that the answer may arrive not in the answer itself, but in the steadfastness you cultivate while you wait. Keep the question alive, carry it forward, and trust that the selection process will reveal its purpose in due time. You are a seed planted in a quiet bed of earth, not a bright meadow full of gossip and noise. In the hush of your solitude, your roots begin to stretch, searching for the unseen water that will sustain you. It is a slow, patient work, far from the applause that a quick sprout might earn. The world, in its rush, often misreads this stillness as a curse, but it is the selection process that shapes the strength of your trunk. When the soil is rich yet unyielding, the seed must learn to trust that the darkness is not a void, but a place where the heart's marrow is forged. Every day you push against the compacted layer, each breath a pledge to remain resilient. Yet the seed is not in a hurry. It knows that the storm will not be a thunderclap of immediate fruit, but a gentle rain that seeps into every crevice. So practice patience like a gardener, tending to the soil with careful hands. Cultivate stillness, a disciplined silence that lets you hear the quiet voice of purpose. When distractions rise like weeds, pull them with gentle persistence, not with a rash uprooting that leaves the earth wounded. Know that the seed's growth is measured by the depth of its roots, not the height of its branches. Remember, your isolation is not a curse, but the precise chamber where your future strength is being molded. In those quiet, patient hours, you are being selected, not merely chosen. Let your growth be a testimony of endurance, a living sermon that the most faithful gifts are formed in the quietest places. You stand before a quiet glass, a mirror that does not merely reflect light but the very pulse of your desire. When the world's noise has faded, that mirror brightens, and the face that looks back is not the one the crowd sees, but the one you have been sculpting in the solitude of your heart. In that stillness, temptation arrives not as a loud shout, but as a soft, insistent whisper. You are enough. You may not be needed. This path is too hard. It is the mirror's deceit, a reflection of what the soul would like to be, not what it is. The same isolation that sharpens your purpose also magnifies the cracks that might lead you astray. Guard this inner glass. First, set a routine of silence, an hour each day, a pause before you answer, before you act. In that pause, ask, is this desire a whisper of God or a rustle of self? Second, keep a journal of thoughts not as a confession, but as a ledger of what tempts your attention. Third, cultivate a companion in humility. Speak your doubts aloud to a mentor, a prayer partner, or the quiet of Scripture. Their eyes will see the reflection you cannot. Remember, the mirror of temptation is a test, not a curse. It is the selection process's final filter, separating the flame that is ready to ignite from the ember that will smolder. In this glass, you see the choice to turn the light inward and let it burn bright, or to let the darkness cloud the vision. Choose the first. Let your isolation be the forge that shapes the great. You stand at a ridge, the wind of doubt swirling at your feet, and the valley below is shrouded in mist. In that hush, the world's clamor fades, and a quiet hand reaches for your heart. This is the moment the harvest of discernment begins. When isolation is a selection process, each day is a seedling of quiet thought. You must tend it. Guard your inner life like a gardener protects fragile bulbs, keep distractions out. Let reverence be your light. The silence you cultivate is not emptiness. It is a field where the seeds of true purpose may germinate. Notice the subtle weeds that creep in the whisper of jealousy, the siren call of comfort. They are not external, but internal. Recognize them as signs, not accusations. Where the world pours noise, plant focus. Where the heart trembles, plant stillness. In this way, you draw the divine vine tight around your soul. The harvest is not a sudden bounty, but a season of patience. Each discerned choice, each quiet refusal of frivolity, is a fruit that ripens. You will learn to taste the sweetness of a life lived in alignment, rather than the bitterness of a path chosen by the crowd. And when the harvest comes, it will be a bounty of purpose, not of applause. It will be a quiet joy that grows from the soil of your solitude, a testimony that your isolation was not a curse, but a crucible, refining you into the shape of the calling that awaits. When the road stretches beyond the crowd, you hear only the wind and the pulse of your own heartbeat. It is in that quiet that the world asks, who are you to wander without a guide? The answer, dear traveler, is not a proclamation of superiority, but a quiet affirmation of purpose. You are not abandoned, you are being steered. The path of solitude is paved with the stones of humility, each step a testimony that God has chosen to shape you through the very absence of familiar voices. In the silence you learn to listen, not to the noise of self-doubt, but to the whisper of the one who speaks through breath and thought. Courage, then, is not the absence of fear, but the resolve to move forward when the horizon offers no familiar landmarks. It is to accept that each solitary mile is a rehearsal for the larger mission, where others will rely on the foundations you have laid alone. Practical wisdom 1. Anchor your solitude in prayer, not isolation. Speak to the one who walks beside you, even when no human ear hears. 2. Keep a journal of doubts and victories. Let it be a compass, not a confession booth. 3. Seek out a mentor, someone who has walked this lonely road before, and ask only what has been distilled into truth. Remember, the world's applause is a fleeting mirage. The quiet courage to walk alone is the true melody that prepares you to step into the choir of His calling. Let that melody guide you, for the path you tread today is the foundation of the purpose you will one day claim. There is a quiet terror that rises when you look down the road that no one else has walked. It is the feeling that every step is a leap into a dark corridor, where the only light comes from a lantern you hold yet. It is in these unlit lanes that the chosen one discovers the true shape of their heart. When you turn away from the familiar, you are not abandoning comfort, but refining your compass. The path that seems foreign is the very corridor that separates you from the noise of the crowd, and it is in that solitude that the soul learns to listen beyond the din of its own doubts. Think of the early disciples who left the nets and the boats, following a man who walked on water. Their isolation from the village was not punishment, but a crucible. In that crucible, their minds were sharpened by silence, their hands by prayer, and their eyes by a purpose that outstripped the fear of the unknown. The reward, then, is not a treasure chest of praise, but a deeper knowing that the world will never again offer you a certainty that feels like a cage. When you feel that tug toward the uncharted, answer not with fear, but with trust. Set aside your need for instant validation. Walk the path with the steady belief that every awkward step is a deliberate act of obedience, each pause a chance to hear the gentle voice saying, "You are more than you see." In the unfamiliar, you will find the kind of clarity that only a solitary journey can bring, one that when you return is not a return but a transformation, a new way of being that the world had never asked for, but the Lord had promised. There are times when the world's clamor fades to a distant hum, and only the breath of your own heart remains audible. In that hush, when the day's demands have been set aside, a different kind of light begins to burn, one that does not require applause, only quiet vigilance. You are not alone in this silence. It is a place where God's hand is felt most distinctly, a field where the soul can be plowed and renewed. The strength you discover in these quiet hours is not a luxury, but a necessity. It is the same steel forged in a smithy that refuses the flame of distraction. When you let your thoughts settle like dew on a window pane, you gain a clarity that the noise of ordinary life can never grant. You learn to hear the subtle cadence of the Spirit, to recognize the small tremors that whisper, "You are still." This is where the discipline of the chosen one is trained. Patience becomes a virtue, focus a shield, and humility a lantern. Practical steps are simple yet profound. Set aside a single, unbroken moment each day. No phone, no television, no idle conversation. Sit, breathe, and let the mind wander only as far as it can without losing its way. Ask yourself, what would happen if this silence were a test? Who would you be when the answer surfaces? Each night, write a brief note of what you sensed, what you felt. Over time, these notes become a map of your inner terrain, marking where the storms have passed and where the calm has settled. In the quiet, your isolation is no curse but a crucible. It is a selection process that refines your spirit, preparing the chosen one not for a single moment of glory, but for a lifetime of purposeful service. There is a quiet moment before the world blares its demands, a pause that feels like a betrayal to the crowd. In that hush, you hear the faint echo of a higher choir, a reminder that your solitude is not a curse, but a crucible. The call to refuse the crowd is not a rejection of humanity, but a deliberate choice to listen to a still, divine voice that no one else can hear. When the crowd offers 1,000 distractions, trends, gossip, complacency, you must ask yourself, whose rhythm do I follow? The noise is a river that swallows the quiet. If you allow it to define your path, your purpose will be a shadow of itself. To refuse the crowd is to guard the sanctity of your inner life. It means setting boundaries around your attention, like a shepherd keeps his flock from the wolves. It is an act of discipline, not pride, that preserves the light within. Practical steps 1. Schedule solitude. Even a 10-minute retreat can restore the clarity of a wounded compass. 2. Listen to your heart's stillness, not the crowd's clamor. 3. Let silence be your companion, not a punishment. Remember, the crowd's applause is the echo of 1,000 "yes, it's right." Your refusal is a quiet affirmation that the truest yes comes from the one who chose you. In that silence, you find the steady rhythm of purpose. Here, amid isolation, you are not alone. You are being shaped, refined, and ultimately revealed. There is a quiet fire that does not burn out when the world's clamor dims. It grows only in the hush of your own keeping. It is not a blaze of pride, but a steady glow that the Lord has set to illuminate your path. In solitude, you first see it, not as a solitary spark, but as a beacon that reflects your own breath and purpose. When you withdraw from the noise, you stop hearing the echo of others' expectations and begin to hear the faint yet unmistakable murmur of your own heart. The light that burns in that stillness is not a curse. It is the furnace that God has chosen to shape you. It is a deliberate selection process. Those who remain calm, who guard their attention, who remain patient, are those who will carry that light into the world. Practical steps are simple. First, set boundaries that quiet the chatter. Turn off the phone for a set hour each day. Second, make a habit of speaking less, listening more. Third, when you feel the pull of distraction, pause and ask, is this a voice of distraction or a whisper of guidance? Each silence becomes a rehearsal for the larger stage. Remember that the light does not seek applause, it seeks purpose. In your isolation, you are not alone. You are being forged. The glow that remains after the storm passes is your testimony that you have been selected, not abandoned. Embrace it, nurture it, and let it shine when the world asks you to step forward. You have stood alone in the quiet, a place that feels like a void, yet this is where the master craftsman works. In the hush between breath and thought, the world's clamor is withdrawn, and the shape of your purpose is traced in invisible lines. This is not a curse of isolation, it is a deliberate pause, a selection process that the Lord has appointed. Silence is a discipline, not a retreat. When you step away from the noise, you learn to listen to the still, small voice that speaks of paths you cannot see. It is the only time the Spirit can speak without being drowned by its own chatter. In that space, you become aware of the subtle currents that seek to divert you, the jealousy of those who feel threatened by your calling, the distraction of endless tasks that promise fulfillment but deliver emptiness. The quiet reveals them, like a filter that lets the true light through. The wise choose silence not as a luxury, but as a weapon. When you sit in stillness for a fixed hour each day, you build a reservoir of attention that can be poured into your work, into your service, into your prayer. It trains your mind to resist the impulse to answer the world with noise, and instead to respond with purpose. It is this disciplined quiet that turns isolation into a forge. So, begin a rhythm of deliberate silence, a sunrise pause, a midday breath, a night before sleep. Let each moment be a deliberate act of selection, a step toward the shape you are meant to become. In the hush, you will find the courage to walk the path the chosen one is meant to tread, not because the world is silent, but because you have chosen the silence that shapes your destiny. There is a quiet, almost invisible wall that rises whenever a heart allows pride to take root. It is not the proud smile that the world sees, but the quiet conviction that one alone possesses the key to salvation, the sole bearer of God's favor. In the solitude that has been chosen for you, this wall grows thicker, turning the isolation you feel into a prison of self-congratulation. Unchecked pride steals the very quiet you have cultivated. It turns the stillness of prayer into a monologue, the listening of God's voice into a demand for applause. It makes you believe that the path you walk is the only one, that any deviation is a betrayal. And in that belief, you abandon the humility that refines the soul. The cost is measured not in lost friendships, but in lost purpose. Pride blinds you to the subtle opposition that whispers, "You're enough as you are." It blinds you to the need for the kind of suffering that shapes a true servant. A heart that thinks it needs no refinement will never be set apart for the deeper work God has prepared. The remedy is simple and profound: pause. Turn your gaze inward, not to your own achievements, but to the quiet hand that has already begun to shape you. Invite humility to sit beside you in your solitary hours. Ask for the grace to see that every breath you take is a gift, not a privilege. In this humble surrender, the isolation you feel becomes a crucible, and the cost of pride is paid with the true value of being fully formed for His purpose. You feel the weight of every ambition, every voice that whispers, be more, do more, stay in the crowd. Yet the quiet inside you knows that each of those urges is a chain, a leash pulled tight by the very heart that seeks to serve. To be set apart is to learn that true freedom does not come from doing more, but from doing less of the self that clings to its own desires. Renunciation is not a curse of loss, but a garden where the soul may grow unspoiled. When you turn away from the applause of the world, you turn toward the silence that God has laid around you. In that silence, the self's ego dissolves, and the Spirit's breath fills the space. The freedom you seek is not a liberation from everything, but a liberation from everything that refuses to bow. Every time you say no to your own fleeting comforts, you carve a space where a higher calling can breathe. Each act of restraint becomes a lever, lifting the weight of your own self and revealing the weight of God's purpose. Practically, start by setting boundaries: the hours you spend on the phone, the conversations that drain your spirit, the habits that feed pride. Replace them with moments of stillness, of listening to the quiet of a prayer, of writing what the heart is still learning. Remember, the isolation you feel is a selection process. As you renounce your own ego, you are not abandoning yourself. You are handing your heart to the one who shapes it. In that hand, the freedom you seek is born, a freedom that steadies your feet and lets your purpose unfold like a flower in the sun. Imagine the quiet moment between heartbeats, where the world's clamor falls away, and the only sound is the pulse of a single truth. In that silence you find your armor, forged not of steel, but of unshakable faith. It is the first guard against the whispers of doubt that creep in when you are alone with your thoughts, a mantle that refuses to be pierced by the weight of isolation. You were chosen not for comfort, but for conviction. The armor of faith is not a shield that tells you to retreat. It is a weapon that teaches you to step forward with calm certainty. When the storm of uncertainty comes, let the words you have kept in your heart, those that have been tested in the furnace of trials, be the steel that holds. Each word is a plate, each memory of God's mercy a rivet that binds it to your spirit. To wear this armor, you must first guard your inner life. Set aside the noise that seeks to erode the very foundation of your belief. In the stillness of evening, write down what has sustained you. Let the act of recording be a reminder that faith is not a one-time donation, but an ongoing investment. Remember, the armor does not make you invincible, it makes you invulnerable. It does not promise a life of ease, but it guarantees a life of purpose. And so, in your solitude, let each breath reinforce the shield that protects you, turning isolation from a curse into the crucible that shapes your destiny. There is a quiet fire that burns in the chambers of those who are set apart. It is not a blaze of passion that consumes, but a refining flame that strips away the dust of complacency. When you feel that isolation tightening around you, ask whether it is a curse or a crucible. The solitude you endure is the hearth where your heart is forged. First, recognize that the fire does not scorch the soul, it melts the cobwebs of self-doubt. In that quiet furnace, every doubt that once seemed a pillar is reduced to ash. Let this process be your discipline. Confront what you love, what you fear, what you are quick to dismiss. Speak to yourself with the same honesty you would offer a close friend, and then allow the heat to reveal the truth. Second, guard your attention as a precious metal. The flame will only consume what it touches. If your mind lingers on noise, it will be spent on the world. Redirect that focus to stillness, to the quiet voice that whispers, "You are being formed." Third, endure the pause between spark and blaze. Patience is the fuel that sustains the fire. Do not rush to the heat. Let the embers glow. In this pause, you learn the rhythm of humility, each ember a lesson that the world does not need to know, but the heart must. The cleansing fire does not reward the proud. It offers the humble the chance to become pure. When the smoke clears, you will see yourself not as a person of circumstance, but as a shape refined by a divine selection process. This is the moment of awakening. Your isolation is not a curse, but the furnace of your calling. Do you ever pause between the thumps of your own heart? In that brief silence, when the pulse lulls and the world seems to hold its breath, you find a room in which God is not only present, but audible. You are not simply a vessel for noise. You are a vessel for the quiet that separates. The breath between heartbeats is the selection chamber where the soul is sifted like grain through a sieve. Each pause is a deliberate act of restraint, a moment to turn away from the clamor of opinions, the lure of distraction, and the whisper of jealousy that seeks to cage you. In that interstice, let your attention become a lantern. Focus on the stillness of the heart, not on the emptiness that surrounds it. When you feel that sense of isolation pressing against your shoulders, remember that it is not a curse, but a crucible. The air you breathe is a reminder that you have been set apart to receive a message that cannot be heard amid the din. Step into that pause. Speak to yourself, "I am listening." Then listen. The world will not answer until you have answered your own heart. When you practice this breathing, you cultivate endurance. The patience that emerges is not passive waiting, but an active refining of your purpose. Your isolation becomes a garden, not a prison, where God's selection process may dry the weeds of doubt and water the seeds of destiny. Feel the breath, and in its quiet, let each heartbeat echo a promise you are chosen not to survive the storm, but to be the vessel that carries its light to others. When you feel the world slipping away around you, imagine a quiet ballroom, the floor a hush of possibility. In that stillness, two dancers begin their duet, Hope, with its bright, restless steps, and Surrender, with its gentle, yielding sway. You are not alone in this choreography. The master of the dance has already placed you on the floor, and each movement is a choice you make. Hope is the flame that keeps you from the cold, the whisper that your journey will be worth the waiting. It is not a reckless blaze that burns without restraint. In the solitude of your selection, let hope be measured, like a candle lit beside a storm, steady, yet aware of the wind. It teaches you to trust that every isolated breath is a preparation, every quiet hour a rehearsal. Surrender, on the other hand, is the quiet turning of your heart toward the unseen music. It is not a relinquishing of purpose, but an alignment of your own will with the divine rhythm. In the isolation that refines you, surrender becomes a deliberate act, laying down your own applause and listening for the deeper note. The dance is not one of contradiction, but of harmony. Hope fuels the steps, and surrender grounds them. When you move in this duet, the isolation that once felt like a curse becomes the very space where your feet learn to dance with purpose. Let your hope lift you, and your surrender anchor you, for in that balance you will find the strength to step into the light that has been waiting for your presence. You have pressed the quiet button in a world that never stops humming. In the hush that follows, a faint echo rises, soft, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakably yours. That echo is not a whisper of wind or a trick of the mind. It is the resonance of a higher calling, a voice that does not shout, but calls with the certainty of a seasoned teacher in a silent chapel. When you feel the thrum of that echo, remember that isolation is not a punishment, but a tuning fork. The noise around you has been turned down to a whisper so the universe can speak through you. The echo is the answer to your own questions, the echo of a promise made long before your first breath. Listen for it not in grand gestures, but in the pause between your thoughts, in the breath that follows a prayer, in the moment when the world's clamor slips away. It demands patience. It does not rush to applause. It urges you to guard your inner life, to keep your spirit as a lantern in the dark, so that the echo does not fade into indistinct silence. This is your selection, not a label of superiority. The echo is a map, a compass pointing toward the place where your talents meet grace. When you step into that echo, you step into a life that is not defined by others' expectations, but by the quiet, deliberate decision of a higher voice, your own, chosen, and unyieldingly true. You have sat alone in the hush of a winter morning, the world outside still breathing its ordinary rhythm. In that quiet, an invisible hand presses upon your chest, a weight that has no shape yet demands attention. It is the unfinished work of your own heart, the unfinished chapters of a life that God has set apart. This weight is not a curse, it is a selection test. Those who are called to light are given a burden, a mantle heavier than their own comfort. When the task feels endless, remember that the weight is a compass pointing toward the next step of refinement. First, acknowledge the heaviness. Do not deny it. The honest soul sees the unfinished as a mirror, reflecting the gaps that must be filled. Then, divide the mountain into a series of stones. One stone at a time, place it with purpose. A small, deliberate action, a prayer, a conversation, a written word, carries the load down the slope. Guard your energy like a precious lamp. Do not let the noise of unfinishedness dim your focus. In silence, let your mind attend to the task, not to the fear of the task. The lesson also lies in patience. The work may feel endless, but each step is a step toward a greater purpose. When the weight becomes a steady rhythm, it is no longer a burden, but a measure of your growth. You do not walk this path alone. The one who lifted the weight also lifts you, turning your isolation into a forge, your unfinished into a finished masterpiece. When the sea of doubt roils and the wind of distractions howls, you find yourself adrift. Yet the ocean is not merely a place of peril. It is a test of the vessel you carry. Your anchor is not a weight that drags you down, but a steadfast point in the shifting tides of your own heart. In the quiet chambers where you first heard the call, a single truth was planted: you are not alone in the storm. Hold fast to that truth. Let it be the rope that ties you to the rock of the Lord's promises. When the currents of peer pressure surge, remind yourself that the anchor lies not in the applause of men, but in the quiet assurance that God knows your worth before you have even seen yourself. To keep the anchor in place, practice the discipline of daily stillness. Set aside moments each sunrise to speak with the same reverence you would a sovereign king. In those silences you will hear the echo of purpose, clearer than any siren song of the world. Remember that isolation is not a shackle, but a forge. When the wind of isolation blows, it is shaping the iron of your resolve. The anchor does not resist the wind, it steadies you. So even as the tides shift, keep your eyes on the steady horizon of His love. In this steadfastness, you will rise from the isolation that hounds you to become the vessel He has called you to be. There is a moment when the world's clamor fades, and a single thread of light appears, not from the horizon, but from the quiet space inside you. That light is the unseen blessing that you have been called to trace. In the hush of isolation, the heart's compass turns inward, and the path it draws is invisible to all but the one who walks it. You might think the solitude is a barren desert, but it is a forge. The very stillness that seems to deny you company is the very place where God plants the seeds that will grow into a harvest unseen. Each quiet hour is a watering can, each moment of restraint a stone laid in a hidden garden. When you step away from familiar faces, you learn to read the language of your own breath. The more you listen, the more you hear the subtle music of your purpose, soft as a whisper, yet louder than any banner. That melody is the unseen blessing, not yet visible, but already shaping your destiny. The path of these blessings is not a straight line. It winds through valleys of doubt, climbs steep cliffs of endurance, and bends around obstacles that appear to be nothing more than distractions. Yet at each bend, a new lesson unfolds. Patience is a virtue that grows only in silence. Humility is a torch that burns brighter in the darkest corners. So let the isolation be the canvas. Paint with the colors of intention, discipline, and faith. For in this concealed space, God is arranging your life like a tapestry, weaving unseen blessings into the fabric of your days. And when the tapestry is complete, you will understand that what once seemed a curse was, in fact, a selection, an invitation to walk a path that only the chosen can see. There is a quiet, unsettling moment when the world's clamor seems to hollow out your own voice. In that hush, you feel the pull of a place that is not yours, a corner of the heart where the noise is turned inward, and a promise that it is not a loss but a gate. The courage to set apart is not a bravado of isolation. It is the deliberate turning of your attention from the familiar to the untried. It is the resolve to walk a path that feels lonely, to learn the language of silence, and to let your spirit breathe on its own terms. When you choose to step away from the comfortable, you are not fleeing. You are being shepherded into a space where the grain of your soul can be inspected, trimmed, and refined. Ask yourself, who will you be without the applause? In that absence, you find the quiet that the world has not yet heard. In that silence, you hear the still, small voice that says, "This is where you are made." Set a boundary. Decline a conversation that drains you. Keep a journal of thoughts that surface when the noise stops. Each act of withdrawal is a deliberate stitch in the fabric of your calling. The courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to feel it and keep moving forward. Remember, the isolation you feel is a selection process. It is the furnace that will render you from the raw material of ordinary experience into the vessel that will carry the extraordinary. In the hush that follows the world's clamor, a quiet storm begins to churn. You, who feel the weight of solitude like a stone in your chest, are not alone in that stillness. It is in this silence that the heart is set to a new compass, where every breath is a deliberate choice. The storm is not a tempest of chaos, but a disciplined gale that rages within. It shaves away the rough edges of pride, it loosens the bindings of complacency, and it forces the soul to confront the deepest longings. You might feel the wind whistling against the walls of your mind, but it is not a warning, it is a refining fire. When the world's noise has faded, the quiet becomes a laboratory. Here, the mind can learn to listen to the gentle whisper of purpose, to the subtle tug of a calling that resists distraction. This is the place where, like a blacksmith, you strike the iron of your will with the hammer of discipline, and each blow creates a sharper edge. To ride this storm, pause, journal the thoughts that surge, let them dry in the sun of reflection. Speak aloud the doubts that surface, for in articulation they lose their terror. Invite a mentor, a trusted soul to witness your currents and offer a steady hand. Remember, this quiet storm does not destroy, it shapes. It is the selection process that chisels the chosen into the vessel God envisions. Your isolation is that furnace where the spark of your identity is not lost, but forged into something resilient and bright. You sit alone with the weight of two truths: mercy, the gentle hand that tends the wound; resolve, the iron will that moves the world. In the quiet of your solitude, each breath is a choice between these forces. Mercy is not weakness. It is the awareness that the fire of purpose can scorch. It is the humility to pause, to water the seed before it grows too hot. When you feel the ache of isolation, let it be a reminder that you are not alone in this selection. Many have walked this path before, and their compassion has guided them to the next step. Resolve, however, is the quiet insistence that the world will not wait. It is the discipline to keep your gaze fixed on the horizon, even when the noise of doubt is louder than prayer. The same isolation that tests you also sharpens this resolve, turning your thoughts into a quiet, relentless engine. Balance them in a way that mirrors the Lord's own example. He loved the sinner, and yet sent the law. You, too, must love your own brokenness, and yet carry the burden of your calling. When you feel compassion for the weary heart that has been set apart, let it fuel, not dilute, your determination. In practice, this means setting boundaries that protect your focus, yet extending a hand to those who, like you, feel the same isolation. Speak words of encouragement, not merely to soothe, but to ignite resolve in them. Speak your truth, but do so with the softness that only mercy can grant. Remember, isolation is a selection process, not a curse. In its stillness, you learn how to blend mercy with resolve, and in that blend, you discover the shape of the one you are meant to become. When you find yourself staring into a blank question, the silence that follows does not mean you are lost. It is the pulse of the selection process. In those moments of unanswered inquiry, the world presses its hand against your heart, asking you to choose what to keep, what to relinquish, what to let grow. The unanswered question is a mirror held up to the soul, reflecting the parts that are still raw, the edges that have not yet been smoothed by faith. You are not abandoned by silence. You are being tuned. Each unresolved query sharpens your discernment, forcing you to turn inward, to seek answers not in external applause, but in the quiet wellspring of God's presence. In the same way a blacksmith hammers a piece of iron until it gleams, the unanswered question is the hammer, painful, relentless, but ultimately forging your purpose. To honor this gift, pause. Record the question in a journal, as if you were writing a letter to the one who knows the answer. Then step back, breathe, and let the words sit in your mind like a seed. Speak it to a mentor or a fellow pilgrim. Let dialogue be the soil that nurtures the answer. If the answer remains elusive, do not despair. Trust that the delay is a deliberate seasoning. The unanswered question is not a barrier, but a compass. It points toward the terrain you must cross, the relationships you must leave, the silence you must embrace. Remember, the most profound truths are often those we cannot answer immediately. In their absence, your isolation becomes a sanctuary where the divine whispers, "Hold on, the path is being prepared." You stand in the quiet, and the world feels a little too still. In those moments, the shadow falls over you, long and deep, and you may wonder whether it is a sign of abandonment. But I ask you, do you see that shadow as a curse, or as the hand that molds the clay of your light? The same darkness that presses against your heart is the furnace where the metal of purpose is forged. Imagine a sculptor who works in stone. Each strike of the chisel shapes the form, but it is the invisible pressure that gives the stone its final contour. Your isolation is not a punishment. It is a deliberate pause, a deliberate solitude that lets the divine hand draw the lines of your destiny. When the world's noise is absent, you hear the faint echo of your own breath. In that echo, you notice the quiet voice of patience speaking, "Do not rush the turning of your own heart." This is where the shadow is not a blind side, but a mirror that reflects what you must learn to accept and to embrace. Do not mistake the weight of this shadow for weakness. Let it remind you that every great journey begins with a step into darkness, for the light that follows is clearer because it has been measured against a counterpoint. In the same way, your restraint from the bright, shallow attractions of the world will sharpen your focus on the subtle, enduring love that calls you. When you feel the pull of doubt, let the shadow be the quiet teacher that says, "Your light is not born of ease, but of the night that forces you to turn inward." And then, with steady heart, step forward into that light, knowing it was shaped by the very darkness you once feared. You have been drawn into a quiet, almost forbidden place. In the stillness that surrounds you, the world's chatter dims to a murmur. This silence is not a void. It is a canvas on which the divine paints the most intimate portrait of your purpose. In that hush, your first task is to become a receiver rather than a speaker. The temptation to rush to the front, to command, to proclaim your thoughts is a familiar one. Yet the most profound wisdom reveals itself when you pause, when you turn inward and listen to the subtle currents of your heart, of your conscience, and of that still, small voice that does not seek approval but only seeks truth. Listen to the silence between the words of Scripture, the pause in a prayer, the breath that follows a moment of awe. In this listening, you discover the contours of your calling. It is not a shout, it is a whisper that grows into a conviction. Your isolation sharpens this ear. You are no longer distracted by the noise of approval or the clamor of failure. You learn to discern the difference between the voice of the world and the voice of the one who has set you apart. In practice, set aside a fixed hour each day, a small window where you speak only to yourself and to Him. Write no words, no commentary, just breathe. When you feel the urge to respond, hold it back. The more you practice this restraint, the clearer the divine guidance becomes. You will find that the most powerful speech you ever make is the one that emerges from a life lived listening. There is a quiet truth that the more we feel isolated, the more the world seems to shrink to a single point, a single question: what will you do next? In the solitude of your own thoughts, the future is not a clear path but a cloud of possibility, and it is here that your courage must be tested. The first lesson is that certainty is a luxury of the comfortable, not of the chosen. In the hush of your own heart, God does not hand you a map. He hands you a compass that points toward the unknown. The courage to accept uncertainty is the courage to stand in that silence, to allow the wind to shape your sails instead of clinging to the helm. It is not a reckless abandonment of plans, but a deliberate surrender to a higher hand. When you let go of the illusion that every detail must be known, you free the mind to listen to the still, small voice that says, "Go." The fear that clings to uncertainty is often a mirror of our own ego, an echo of the desire for control. By refusing to let that echo dictate your steps, you place yourself in the very selection process that refines you. Practical wisdom lies in the small acts that build this courage. Pause at the end of a task and sit with the feeling of not knowing. Ask others for advice, yet trust your own inner direction. Set a goal, but remain open to the detours that God may send. Each pause, each relinquishment, each step into the unknown is a deliberate act of faith. And it is this faith that transforms isolation into a crucible of purpose. The harvest of endurance does not ripen in a single season. It is a slow, deliberate gathering of grain laid out on a plain of quiet, a field where the wind is the only companion that does not speak in applause. You. Feel the weight of the world pressing against your chest, each noise a stone on your shoulders. Yet the isolation you once feared is the very soil that nourishes your patience. In the hush, your spirit learns to listen to the faint cadence of His purpose instead of the clamor of the crowd. Endurance is not a passive waiting, it is a deliberate practice of restraint. When you choose to step back from a relationship that stifles the light, you are not abandoning humanity. You are clearing a path for a clearer view. When you refuse the easy route of distraction, you build a muscle that will support you when the storms come. The true measure of this muscle is the quiet confidence that grows with each test. It is the calm confidence of a soldier who has trained in the desert, knowing that the desert will not swallow him, but will shape him into something capable of carrying the load of tomorrow's harvest. Remember, the harvest of endurance is not meant to keep you in a cave forever. It is a preparation for a day when the world will see the shape of your soul and ask, "Who has been forged in these lonely trials?" The answer, gentle and sure, will be, "I was shaped in silence, and I stand ready to reap the blessings of a life lived in His measured rhythm." When the world rushes like a tide, the pause is not a void, it is a quiet furnace. In the hush that follows a storm of noise, you feel the weight of expectation, the pull of distraction. Yet it is within that stillness that the chosen one learns to breathe. Think of a stone dropped into a lake. The surface shivers for a moment, then settles into a calm depth. That depth is where the water's true strength lies. In your isolation, the surface begins to dull, and the currents of doubt grow louder. But if you hold your breath, you find a still core, an anchor that can weather any wave. The pause is the moment when your spirit asks, "What is the purpose of this silence?" It is the answer that is not spoken aloud, but heard in the beating of your heart. Here, discipline is born. You learn to guard the focus that others call idle. Instead of filling the quiet with fear or idle chatter, you fill it with intention, each breath a deliberate act of faith. In those moments, the subtle opposition, jealousy, doubt, a fleeting sense of, "I am not enough," manifests as a faint echo. But you can choose to listen or to let it pass. The chosen one, in this pause, trains the heart to be a quiet fortress, not a fragile window. Remember, isolation is not a curse. It is a selection process. Each pause is a crucible where your purpose is refined. When you emerge, the strength you carry is not the absence of noise, but the mastery over it. There is a moment, a hush that settles over your heart, when the world's clamor has faded into a distant echo. In that stillness, you hear a single, unmistakable voice, soft, unassuming, yet piercing the very core of your isolation. It is not the call of ambition nor the murmur of a crowd. It is the quiet certainty that comes from a place beyond the self. When the voice that breaks the silence speaks, it does not demand your attention with thunder. It invites you to breathe, to let your thoughts settle like dew on a stone. In that pause, you find the true measure of your selection. The voice says, "You are not abandoned, you are being shaped." It reminds you that the solitude you feel is not a curse, but a crucible, where the grain of your purpose is drawn out. Listen for its cadence, a gentle reminder that every hardship is a lantern, every solitude a corridor leading to a deeper communion with the one who chose you. It warns against the temptation to fill that silence with noise, talk, distraction, or the echo of pride. Instead, it offers a discipline of stillness, a practice of listening that refines your spirit into a vessel fit for a divine task. When you answer, do so with humility, for the voice that breaks the silence is not a grand proclamation, but a quiet invitation to align your breath with the breath of the Maker. In that alignment, you discover that the isolation you endure is the very soil in which your chosen life is sown. When the night presses in and the world around you grows cold and distant, remember that the isolation you feel is not a void but a forge. In those hours of quiet, a small, steady light flickers within, an ember that does not burn from your own heat, but from the presence that has been set with you from the start. You have been called to dwell in a space where the noise of the crowd is muffled. That silence is not a prison, it is a lens. Through it, the divine glow that has been poured into your heart becomes visible, unclouded by the bright distractions of the world. The light that guides you is not an external beacon but an inner compass, a truth that has been etched into your soul during the moments of solitude. It whispers, "You are not alone. You are accompanied by a grace that transcends your own understanding." When darkness threatens to swallow you, let that light become the focus of your attention. Turn your gaze inward. Let it steady like a lighthouse. Let it reveal the path that only a chosen one can tread. The more you practice listening to that interior glow, the sharper your discernment becomes. You will learn to separate the fleeting shadows of doubt from the enduring brilliance of purpose. Remember, this light does not grow brighter for its own sake. It grows because you allow it to shine through your actions. Speak kindness, act with humility, and walk patiently. In the quiet of your isolation, let the light guide you not to a destination of glory alone, but to a place where your very being is shaped, refined, and ultimately fulfilled. You have lived in the hum of expectation, a quiet place where the world's chatter feels safe. Yet that same hum is a blanket that hides the edge of a sharper truth. To be set apart does not mean to cling to the familiar, it means to step into the unknown with a heart unafraid of loss. The first step in that courage is recognizing that comfort is not a blessing, it is a prison. In the quiet of solitude, the walls that once felt solid begin to crack, and the whisper of a different path grows louder. If you remain glued to what feels good, you deny yourself the very purpose you were chosen to fulfill. So ask yourself what daily habits, friendships, or routines are merely soothing rather than shaping. Ask, not out of disdain, but out of devotion. A single conversation with a friend who has left a stagnant job for a ministry in a distant city can remind you that true growth requires sacrifice. A single moment of silence in a crowded room can reveal the weight of unspoken doubt. Practical action follows. Choose one comfort to release each week. Set a boundary with a social media habit that drags you toward distraction. Replace a comfortable routine with a task that feels a little strange. A volunteer project, a study of scripture, a prayer that stretches your heart. Each small surrender is a stone laid on the path toward the greater good. Remember, the courage to let go is not a reckless abandon. It is a deliberate, disciplined choice. By trusting that God's selection process is a refining furnace, you turn the fear of loss into a quiet confidence that the isolation you endure is not a curse, but a deliberate preparation for the life you were destined to live. You sit alone as the day folds into night, the hum of the world outside a distant echo. In that hush, the truth of your isolation speaks. It is not a curse, but a forge, the discipline of daily. Self-examination is the hammer that shapes the metal of your soul. First, breathe. Let the breath be the measure of your attention. Count the moments when your thoughts drift to the noise, work, gossip, the endless scroll. Notice where your heart leans, where pride shadows humility. This is not a self-critical lecture. It is a quiet mapping of the terrain that God is preparing. Second, ask the questions the Lord would ask a child in a garden. What has my life fed the beast of envy? What has my silence nurtured? Write those answers in a notebook that sits beside your bed. The act of writing is a prayer of remembrance, a record of the battle between the self and the selfless. Third, practice restraint. When you feel the urge to act on a sudden impulse, anger, pride, or fear, pause. Let the pause be a sanctuary where the Spirit can whisper its truth. The discipline of restraint is the same as the discipline of the Apostle Paul, who wrote, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world." Finally, finish with gratitude. Acknowledge the moments of quiet that refine you. Each confession, each restraint, each prayer is a stone laid upon the path God has chosen for you. Remember, you are not a lonely wanderer. You are a pilgrim in a selection process, and your daily self-examination is the compass that keeps you pointing toward the heart that awaits you. There are moments when the applause of the world feels like a hollow echo, a noise that never settles. You may find yourself standing in the quiet, alone with a question that seems louder than any shouts. What am I truly meant to do? In that silence, the first truth unfolds. Your purpose is not a trophy for applause. It is a task for your heart. When you are set apart, the isolation you feel is not a curse, but a crucible. Praise is a fleeting flame that can burn or be extinguished by wind. Purpose, however, is a steady fire that must be fed with intention. It is the work that remains when the cheers fade, the steady hand that steadies the wheel of your life. You will be tempted to chase validation, to measure your worth by the applause of friends or the headline of your own success. Yet the path you are chosen for requires a different kind of gratitude, one that looks inward to the quiet voice that calls you to serve, to shape, to endure. Your isolation is a space where that voice becomes clearer, unmasked by the noise of expectation. To nurture this purpose, practice restraint. Withdraw once a day, turn your attention inward, and ask not what the world will think, but what the Creator will thank you for. Surround yourself with those who remind you of the work, not the accolades. Let patience be your companion. The work you are called to does not finish in a moment of brilliance, but in a series of small, faithful steps. When you stand alone, remember the purpose that lies beyond praise is the one that will carry you out of the darkness into the light of your calling. It is a selection, not a reward, a test, not a trophy. And in the quiet of that test, you discover the true measure of your destiny. There is a quiet place where the world falls silent, where the clamor of daily life is reduced to a single breath. In that hush, the heart is forced to speak alone with the one who calls. You stand there, alone. Figure against a blank horizon, and the first test of faith appears to keep your gaze fixed on the unseen altar when every instinct urges you to stray. In isolation, faith is no longer a backdrop. It becomes a torch that must be lit by your own hand. You will encounter the subtle weight of doubt, an unsteady whisper that says, "You are alone for a reason." It is not a curse, but a crucible, designed to refine your trust until it is unshakable. When the noise of the world cannot drown you, your conviction is measured by the steadiness of your own breath. Consider the story of a shepherd who, alone upon a hill, heard the faint cry of a lost lamb. He followed the sound not because the path was clear, but because he had faith that he would guide him. His isolation sharpened a single purpose to find the one. Thus, in your solitude, make a covenant with yourself to listen. Set aside the need for applause and instead cultivate a quiet, disciplined pause. Breathe, and seek the voice that whispers, "You are not abandoned, but chosen." Remember, the test of faith in isolation is not a sentence of abandonment. It is the very selection that chooses those who can live with nothing but the presence of the Lord. In that stillness, you become the vessel the world will one day need. There is a stillness that settles over you when the world's clamor fades, and in that silence you begin to hear the quiet heartbeat of God. You are not alone, you are simply listening in the hush of your isolation. Each breath becomes a lesson, each pause a revelation. Observe first the rustle of a leaf, then the way a stranger's smile wavers, then the way your own heart shifts. This is the blessing of quiet observation, a discipline that sharpens your spirit like a sculptor's chisel. It teaches you to see beyond surface noise, to recognize the subtle currents of faith, doubt, and hope that swirl within you and around you. When you learn to watch your thoughts as a steward watches a flock, you discover that every fleeting distraction is a potential trap. You can then turn that distraction into a doorway, a chance to redirect your focus toward the divine purpose that has been planted in you. In such stillness, you also meet the quiet rebel, your own pride, your own fear. By confronting them without the heat of judgment, you find the courage to let them pass, to let God's light fill the space they once occupied. Remember, the more you practice this patient watching, the more you refine yourself, and the more you become the instrument that God has set apart. So, allow the silence to become your teacher. Let it shape you, not as a curse, but as a deliberate selection process, preparing you for the work that lies ahead. You sit alone after the din of the world has faded, the quiet a weight of its own. In that hush, you feel the tremor of a hand that neither you nor the noise can see. It is not a hand that pushes you to the edge, but one that steadies your steps as a shepherd guides a lamb through a valley. The unearned strength that comes from solitude is not a gift, it is a training ground. Each moment of isolation is a furnace, and the unseen hand is the flame that shapes. It does not shout, it whispers, "Hold fast." The work is slow, but the shape is firm. In those solitary hours, you learn to listen to the rustle of your own heart, the quiet call of a purpose that outlives your current comforts. The hand that steadies you is relentless in its patience. It does not rush you to a finish line, but to a finish that is yours alone. When you feel the pull of envy, distraction, or the faint echo of doubt, remember that the hand is there, unyielding but tender. It will not shield you from the wind, but it will weave a cloak of resilience from what the wind offers. Your isolation is not a curse, but a selection. It is a place where the unseen hand can craft a purpose that no noise can dilute. Trust that the strength you feel is not your own, but the quiet, steadfast work of that hand, guiding, refining, and preparing you to step forward when the world is ready to hear the voice that has been shaped in the silence. You've walked the streets of noise for too long, hearing every voice, every rumor, every applause as if they were the end of your story. The world insists that your worth is measured by the volume of your achievements, the size of your circle, the clamor of your success. Yet the very same voices that promise warmth are the very ones that drown the quiet where the true call of your heart lies. In this pilgrimage, the first step is to turn your attention inward, to invite the hush that God has reserved for the chosen. It is not a retreat for the weary, but a discipline for the willing. When you pause, you separate the noise of self-congratulation from the stillness of divine instruction. In that silence, you learn to listen not for your own desires, but for the whisper that speaks in the quiet heart of your soul. You are being selected, not merely to survive, but to be formed. The journey from noise to stillness is not a surrender to loneliness, but a sharpening of purpose. Each moment of silence is a workshop where your spirit is bent and strengthened. You learn to let go of distractions that promise instant gratification, yet block the steadiness of faith. You cultivate the courage to outgrow environments that no longer shape you, to cut ties that feed false pride. Remember, the isolation you feel is not a curse, but a selection process. In the calm between the clamor, the divine hand molds you, readying you to step into the light called for you. And when the world's noise returns, you will stand unshaken, a vessel of purpose forged in quiet. You have walked the quiet path, feeling the weight of the world fall away. In that stillness, the voice that once whispered questions now speaks with a certainty that is not your own, but a call that is louder than any applause. The call to serve beyond self. When you are set apart, you do not become a monument of solitude, you become a vessel. Think of a candle that once lit does not burn for its own flame, but for those who sit too close to the darkness. The isolation that has shaped you is not a curse, but a forge, tempering your spirit so it can be the light others need. The first step is to surrender the desire to be praised. It is not a weakness to let go of the need for recognition. It is the first act of humility that opens you to God's plan. Listen to the quiet call of those who feel unheard, and let that be your compass. Your solitude has sharpened your discernment. Use it to see where the world has misplaced its attention. Practical, set a small, consistent time each day to ask, what can I do for someone else without looking for an audience? Offer your skill, your time, your listening ear. When you serve, you will find that the isolation you once feared dissolves into purpose, as your hands become the bridge between your preparation and their need. Remember, the isolation you have endured was never to isolate you from the world, but to prepare you for the work of love, an enduring, quiet strength that moves beyond the self and into the lives you touch. There is a quiet promise that lies in the hush of your solitude, a promise not of abandonment, but of design. In the stillness where the world's noise has been stripped away, a hand, one that knows craft and patience begins to shape what you once thought was merely a lone wanderer. You are not a relic left to rot in isolation. You are a seed planted in a fire-hot soil of trials. The very fire that scorches the bark will leave the heart clear and the purpose unblemished. Each day of quiet, each moment of intentional withdrawal is a bead in the necklace of your destiny. Each bead a testimony of resilience. Remember, the Maker does not finish a vessel with a single stroke. He works a slow, deliberate rhythm. In your solitary hours, practice the discipline of attention. Guard your thoughts as a shepherd guards his flock. Speak not to the world, but to the quiet voice that knows the measure of your heart. Let silence be your teacher, not your enemy. As you outgrow the comforts that no longer fit, you will find that the very relationships that once anchored you become the very weights that lift you. The opposition, jealousy, distraction, the subtle whisper of doubt are not obstacles, but instruments of refinement, turning raw iron into a blade that will cut the wrong from the right. When the world finally sees your finished shape, it will not be for the glory of an individual, but for the fulfillment of a purpose that began in the depths of your isolation. That is the promise of a shaped destiny, a life no longer a solitary echo, but a resonant chord in the symphony that God is composing. Chosen one, if you hear this, write 888 in the comments. Let this be your response to the other chosen ones, and write what you received today in the spirit of gratitude for this day. The quiet moments that once felt like solitude were not a penalty, but a crucible. In the stillness of your own world, the noise of the crowd receded, allowing the subtle currents of purpose to surface. You found that isolation was not a void to be filled, but a space to be refined. When the world calls you the chosen one, it does not do so because you are alone, but because you have learned to hear the silence between the chords of your own heart. This selection process is not a universal path. It is a bespoke journey. Those who remain after the filtering of doubt and distraction are the ones who were meant to carry the torch. It is not an invitation for everyone to join in the same way. It is a call to recognize that your trials are not a punishment, but a permission. Permission to step into a role that demands a different kind of presence. When you finally step back from that quiet place, you will see that the isolation you endured was the training ground for resilience, insight, and clarity. You are not a relic of loneliness. You are the embodiment of the chosen path taken with intentional solitude. Carry that understanding forward, and let it guide you as you move from isolation to impact, knowing that your selection was not a curse, but a profound invitation to become exactly what the world needs. Thanks for watching. If this message resonated with you, you can support the channel by giving it a like. And if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe and ring the bell. Join the movement. See you soon.